Welcome to the Travelman Podcast. I'm your host, Ben, and if you're joining me for the first time, then I say hello and thank you for listening. And if you're a returning listener, then I say thanks for listening. On today's episode, we'll be talking about a few things like some traveling around Australia, which I want to do, being out of lockdown, which is absolutely amazing, not having to wear masks, which is even better, and a few other things like missing Singapore and maybe even going back to Singapore. Who knows? Anything's possible next year, and enjoy the podcast. So first off, hello everyone, thank you, or everyone, one listener. It's always one listener. Remember, it's always one listener. So I hope you've all been well. I've been pretty good through this period of time, even though it's been hard, as the lockdowns in Melbourne have been pretty hard for us Melbourners. We've been maybe the most locked down city in the world. You know what? We're just getting our freedom back now, which is great. Just the other day, just yesterday, as I'm recording this on a Monday, but yesterday we got our freedoms back in regards to being able to dispose of our masks. So now we only use our masks in certain situations, like, if we have to go into a bank, if we have to rob a bank, if we have to go, anywhere that's an enclosed situation, like even to a shopping center or a cafe. And I'm guessing as you walk into the cafe, you'll have to have your mask on, but then when you sit down and, get something to eat, you take your mask off. But when you're walking around just the suburbs and going for a walk, a nice leisurely stroll, or if you're, not very close to someone, that means you don't need to wear a mask, which is kind of cool. So the masks bit for me have probably been the hardest part of this whole lockdown. So now we're able to do a lot more things. I think we can nearly do everything that we used to do before. It's just the whole mask situation. Also limited numbers, obviously, in cafes, restaurants, art galleries, museums, cinemas, all that's still below certain levels. So I think it will take until a vaccine, until we're able to actually probably even travel the world. Who knows? They might want to have a vaccine for us travelers while we're visiting different countries. So I can see that probably happening, that you can't actually leave your country or you can't enter a country unless you have a proper vaccine. But I don't really want to have a vaccine because, that's a contentious issue, actually, vaccines. So I don't know what I'm going to do with that. But anyway, so I hope that you enjoyed last episode, which was the Cristina Zenato, the Shark Whisperer. She's a fantastic lady. She actually helped me on a recent episode of my other podcast, on Natural Podcast. So if you haven't heard on Natural Podcast, go give that a listen because it's pretty cool. Obviously, there's no special guest this month because it's a monthly podcast now. At the end of every Wednesday, I bring out a episode. So this month, I'm actually recording an episode quite late because I haven't had anything really to talk about, but now I can actually talk about a few things because I'm going to do a bit of traveling throughout Australia. Hopefully, I'm going to do some traveling in my state. Because you got to remember, I haven't been able to leave Melbourne, and I haven't traveled overseas since July last year. It's a long time. It's a real long time for someone like me. I'm usually traveling all the time, or as much as I can. So to have no travel in the foreseeable future, it's pretty hard for me. But you know what? This is a first world issue, and there's a lot of other things that are more important than just traveling. But yeah, geez, it's been difficult. But I am happy to say I'll be doing some traveling this week. Actually, going somewhere that's pretty close to me. But I'll talk about that in a second. And in regards to any future guests, I've got a guy lined up. I've just got to write some show notes for him, so he's going to come on the podcast. There's a couple of other people that I want to reach out to again to come back on the podcast, because they did say that they would come on, but just give us a bit of time and wait till COVID settles down a bit. But you know, COVID's only really settled down here in Australia, New Zealand, and parts of Asia. I think the rest of the world is still pretty COVID heavy. And yeah, the rest of the world's struggling big time with COVID-19. So yeah, I don't know how the world's going to travel in the future. It's really interesting. But yeah, COVID, like we haven't had a COVID or a case of COVID for the last 21, 22 days now. I think we've had 21 days of 0 cases and 0 deaths. So if we can get up to 28 days, I think that's eradication. I think we've done well to get rid of COVID, especially in my state of Victoria where I live. So that's pretty cool. And then we just got to be really careful of the people that we bring into our state. So they'll all have to probably have a 14-day lockdown, or, they'll need 14 days to make sure that they don't have COVID, or they'll need to have a vaccine, something like that. Now, borders in Australia, some are closed, some are open. I know the New South Wales border, which is a northern state above Victoria, that will be opening to us pretty soon. I cannot wait to go to New South Wales. It's a great place. But I guess what I really can't wait for is the borders of Queensland to open, so I can visit some friends. I can go up to the far north of the state. It's a very tropical state, and then if you go inland, it gets quite arid and hot. But I really, really, really love tropical styled weather. Like I like warm, humid weather. Obviously, I don't like working in it, but I like to travel to warm destinations. I'm not much of a snow person at all. I like mountains, but not snow. Oh, there's a travel bubble opening up as well. I think it's we're either accepting New Zealanders now, or that's interesting. I wonder. But yeah, New Zealand is definitely a place that's forming a travel bubble with Australia or parts of Australia, because all of our states are independent to each other. They all have a premier running a state, and then the premier decides if the borders are open or closed. And I know the premier in Western Australia, he has closed the borders to everyone. I think he kind of even wants Western Australia to be separate to Australia, which is stupid, maybe. I've also heard quite a lot today. I've also heard that Asian cities, there's some Asian cities that we could potentially be forming travel bubbles with. I know that one is Singapore, and Singapore is an amazing place, and I really, really, really enjoy Singapore. I know a lot of people, well, some people I've spoken to really don't like Singapore at all, but I really want the opportunity to get back to Singapore. And you're probably wondering why. Well, I will list a few reasons why I love Singapore. I love the warmth of Singapore, like I mentioned earlier. I like warm tropical weather, and Singapore has got some of the best gardens in the world. Now, gardens and plants are some of my favorite things in the world. Also, I like to say some of the best gardens in the world are actually in Singapore. Now, the Singapore Botanic Gardens is a fantastic place to visit if you've ever got a chance to go to Singapore. Inside the Singapore Botanic Gardens, it houses the National Orchid Garden, which is another price. I think it's $5 or Singapore dollars, whatever that is. So that's fantastic to see. It does cost money. It's not free like the Singapore Botanic Gardens, but it does cost you a little bit of money. It's worth it. You should definitely go to the National Orchid Garden. And if you're ever in Singapore, you'll want to also go to Gardens by the Bay. It's probably the nicest part of Singapore. It's somewhere I'm not going to miss again. Now, you want to go to the Flower Dome. It's a giant dome-shaped enclosure. It's a huge enclosure. It houses thousands, if not millions, of different plants and trees and shrubs and so forth from all over the world. I even noticed some Australian plants planted around. It's got its own climate control system. It's pretty cool. Yeah, I wonder how they actually got all those plants over there. Because they've planted some huge trees. They would have had to ship them from around the world in planes and so forth, but that's pretty cool. Also, in Gardens by the Bay, you have the Cloud Forest, which is that massive, incredible waterfall, which is an incredible feat of engineering. It has that waterfall on the outside. I think there's a couple of them that flow down to the outside of, or the perimeter of the Cloud Forest. Now, you can get around the Cloud Forest by walking around it. There's a looped track that goes right up to the top. It's pretty high, so I guess if you want to jump off it, you'd probably die. Don't know why I said that, but that's pretty scary stuff. Don't jump off the cloud forest, please. Now, this place, it's got cool climate plants, which is kind of cool. It is a fun place to visit. I would really go to the cloud forest if you ever get a chance. Now, you want to also go to the ornamental tree forest. It's that thing that you see in marketing. It's these huge trees that kind of look more like mushrooms coming out of the ground. Now, there is a walk that you can do above it, which I haven't done, which looks nice. So you can do that too. It's a nice area. So the ornamental tree forest is within all that area where the cloud forest is and the flower dome. So you can do all that together. And another thing that I like about Singapore is that it's got hawker centres. Hawker centres like the Maxwell Food Centre, where you can try some of the best Singaporean Malaysian food around. You've also got things like the Nathan Food Centre, another really fine option for food. And remember, to save a table, just put a handkerchief or a packet of tissues on the table, and no one will take that table from you. You could even put a wallet on that table with $100 poking out of it. No one's going to steal it unless you're a tourist. And then if you steal it, you're in jail. So you don't want to steal nothing. Also, I'd really die for another $35 Singapore sling from Raffles, which is that famous hotel where you drink the Singapore slings, you can eat peanuts, and then you leave the shells all over the ground. So you're just flicking shells all over the ground. I really enjoyed doing that last time. I had no problems with actually flicking shells on the ground and being a very messy boy. But other than those things to do in Singapore, Singapore is just a great place to go. They're very friendly people. It's a neat place. It's really well run, and it's my type of city. Now, the traveling I'm going to do soon will be going down to Gippsland. Now, Gippsland is in Victoria. It's in the southeastern part of Victoria. It's a really, really wonderful place. And I'll be staying in Lakes Entrance, which I've driven through there a few times to go up to Merimbula and Pambula, that area, because we used to go there as kids. Mum and Dad used to drive us all the way over to Merimbula, and we'd sometimes stop in Lakes Entrance. But Lakes Entrance is a very pretty little town where you got great food, you got some really good places to go to from Lakes Entrance, so it's a really cool place to base yourself. Like, for instance, we'll be going to the Buchan Caves, which isn't very far from where we'll be staying, and those Buchan Caves are really famous for its stalactites and stalagmites, so there'll be some cool things that we'll be seeing. We've actually booked accommodation on the main strip, and in Lakes Entrance, they've got some walking tracks that you can take. You can go on a boat to look at dolphins and whales and all that stuff. You can go for a swim at the beach, which looks nice. And there's also plenty of fresh seafood. The town has got heaps of seafood. There's even boats that come to the marina or the ports where you can go right up to the boat and you can get yourself a styrofoam container full of prawns. And that's something that I really want to do. So that'll be really nice, and the ability to swim in the ocean again is going to be cool as well. I reckon the last time I swam at a beach, it must have been around about July last year in Vietnam. I was staying at the Annam Hotel, or the Annam Resort, which I've spoken about on the podcast before, and that's in Cam Ranh, which is south of Nha Trang. I really miss Vietnam. Maybe they'll form a travel bubble with Australia so I can get to Vietnam. I really want to get back to Bali as well, but I think Bali's had a lot of problems with COVID-19, and they're still probably struggling with not having tourists come to their little island. So I'd love to get back to Bali. I don't know how I'm going to get back there, but yeah, getting back to Lakes Entrance, we'll be going to a town that's nearby of Lakes Entrance called Mee Tung, where they've got an amazing place called the Mee Tung Pub, which is famous for having great views and great food. So that will be really nice. I booked lunch there. Also going to a place called Froggy's Bistro for dinner. It's apparently serves authentic French food, which I'm really excited to try. And one of my favorite dishes, and one of my wife's favorite dishes, is bouillabaisse, which is a traditional Provençal fish stew. That dish originates in Marseille, in the south of France, so it's really, really delicious. I know it sounds probably disgusting, fish stew, but it's really tasty. So I can't wait to try that. Probably has some moules and frites, which will be nice as well. There's a cafe in town called the Funky Monkey, and apparently that's a real funky monkey-ish type of place to go for breakfast, and I'm sure I'll get a delicious almond latte there. I'm so excited to go away. Can you hear it in my voice? I'm so excited. Oh my God. Take me there. Take me there. All right, we'll also be dining out at the Central Hotel Bistro, and that is in town in Lakes Entrance as well, and I can't wait for that food. That looks really delicious. Oh, but you know what? Being able to explore our state is just so damn good, and something I never really prioritized because I've always said, we'll do international travel first. And international travel for my wife and I has never been that expensive because the places that we go to aren't terribly outrageously expensive. So I found actually traveling in Australia to be more expensive hotel-wise than it is for Southeast Asia, for instance, which we visit a lot. We felt we could save, we saved money by leaving the country, leaving Australia on a decent priced flight to go to Southeast Asia. And we think that we actually saved money than actually spending, what was it, a few $1,000s or whatever to get to Cairns, for instance, to go to Port Douglas, to do the reef, to do the Daintree Forest and stuff. And by the time you've paid for your accommodation, paid for this, paid for that, I mean, you'd be up around about the same amount of money. Australia's an expensive place, and I think travellers don't realise actually how expensive Australia is. I mean, Australia's great. It's got a lot to offer, but, considering now that us Australians are kind of locked up in a sense that we can only go within Australia, travel within Australia, I think some hoteliers and resorts and people that do tours and so forth will probably have to drop their prices for us because, they're not getting international tourists. Australia's not allowing international tourists, and I don't know when they're going to open up the borders for international tourists. But if you're an international tourist and you want to come to Australia, you won't be coming here anytime soon. And when you do come here, you'll have to do a 14-day quarantine, and you might even have to get yourself immunized over COVID, so you'll have to get that injection. I know it's crazy, but it's just the way life is. My wife and I were talking about it just last night going out to dinner and was like, the world has changed. And it has. It's changed. It's not a bad change. It's just different. So let me talk about some places I want to travel to within Australia. One place I would really like to go to is Northern Territory. And I want to check out Uluru and Kata-Tjuta, which is, formerly the Olgas. So Uluru and Kata-Tjuta is the name given to that whole area, that UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is kind of cool. So I can't wait to go there, and I guess I'd have to fly into Alice Springs to get there, and then it's a drive there. So that's a possibility. Also, I've heard Darwin. Darwin is cool because it kind of has that Southeast Asian feel to it, and I think if you were to take a boat from Darwin to Bali, it doesn't take that long. So you can now kind of visualize or understand how close Darwin is to Bali and how far away Darwin is from Melbourne. It's pretty far because Bali's a good 4 or 5 hours. Can't wait to go there. I probably want to also go to Kakadu. I want to go to Katherine, and there's some places in the Northern Territory I want to visit. Now, I also want to get a chance to go to Western Australia I keep burping. I also want to get a chance to go to Western Australia and visit the Ningaloo Reef, which is located on the Ningaloo coast and all that area. It's apparently a World Heritage Site. So I've heard it's less visited than the Great Barrier Reef of Queensland. I've also heard that the Ningaloo Reef is probably in a better condition than the Great Barrier Reef at Queensland, which isn't in a great condition. But if you want to know more about the Ningaloo coast, and look it up on the interwebs, but apparently it's 705,000 hectares of heritage listed coral and area. It's pretty cool. I really need to get there, and I'm guessing I would have to fly into Perth because the Ningaloo coast area is about 1,200 kilometers north of Perth. And I am guessing again that I would have to fly from Perth to get to the Ningaloo. So that is some cool stuff that's going to be happening. Now, I just want to say with the podcast, I still love doing the podcast. This will be a short episode. I am engulfed with work for Unnatural Podcast. Steve, who's my co-host, and we are working on so many different stories all the time that I don't have a heap of time to do the Travelman Podcast. And my whole idea was to cancel the Travelman Podcast or put it on hold because of the whole COVID stuff, and as well as starting Unnatural. But I really do want to try and endeavor to keep it going by getting new guests on and a whole bunch of stuff. I got some other ideas about maybe getting people like you onto the podcast to talk about your city. I'd probably call it Your City, and we could talk for 20, 25 minutes about the place that you live and the things that you love about it. So that's an option as well for the podcast that, come on. So if you're interested to come on my podcast, Travelman Podcast, and talk about your city, email me, travelmanpodcast@gmail.com. That would be cool to hear from you. I've got a couple of people that I'm thinking of that I really want to reach out to talk about their city or their town where they come from. Let me know what's cool about it. Also, next month, which will be the last Wednesday of December, I'm not planning on having a Travelman Podcast episode out. I will be away. I don't really want to think about any podcast, not even Unnatural. I'll have episodes for Unnatural right through Christmas and New Year's and all that. My co-host and Steve and I, we have actually pre-recorded a bunch of episodes, so they'll be going up every week up until Christmas, and we still got to record one or two more, and then we'll be set up until the middle of January, something like that. So that's really cool, and I would endeavor to say that in the new year, I will have some new guests on. I'm really hoping that the end of January, I'll be back with a brand new episode of Travelman Podcast, hopefully with a guest on, because I do have to write up show notes for someone that does want to come on the podcast. So I've got to do that. I have actually another person that really wants to come on the podcast, so I gotta probably write up a couple of bunches of show notes. But that's all cool. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If I've been distant, I'm sorry. And if you haven't heard Unnatural Podcast, and go and listen to that. It's really cool. You can't miss the big yellow logo that Steve designed. We talk about weird, strange stories, and I think it's fun, but it's totally nothing like Travelman Podcast, because this is kind of pretty loose compared to that stuff, because it's all script driven. But yeah, all good. Nice to talk to you all. I'll see you later, and in the meantime, if I do think of anything, or if I feel like doing I'm inspired now, then I'll do that. Hooroo, tootaloo, and goodbye.